Well, I think we're in a lucky time within our profession. There's incredible shortages still. So arboriculture consulting is still a very well-paid green industry, and I think that's really fortunate.
Absolutely.
And Peter, I don't know that we've met before. Peter Schwarzbauer. Your microphone.
Close enough. Schwarzenegger, if you like.
Schwarzenegger will do, but I'm sure it's Schwarzbauer.
Yeah, black farmer.
Schwarzbaumer. And Barmer is
Schwarzbauer, which means black farmer.
Okay.
Yep. We have met before, but a long time ago at one of the first valid things in Melbourne.
Okay. Well, hopefully it wasn't badly behaved.
No.
It's a change, isn't it?
Mm.
Hi, Vicky. I might just pull up my emails and get on with the first thing so that hopefully we can finish nice and promptly today and get it out in a 60-minute stint, which would be really nice. Doesn't matter if we go over, but it'd be nice to be concise. So I have several questions that have been asked of me. One of them I think is just purely intellectual, so we don't have any pictures to go with it, and I'll just be able to address that by discussing it. The others I may need to address. Now, Peter's asked me a really good question. So his is just intellectual. Do pines usually set fruit every year or every couple of years, or are they like bunyas and fruit supposedly every 3 years? That on 1 year, that's on 1 year off the next, is common with various species. But what are the drivers? One of arguably the best tasting avocados varieties, a Charwell, is no longer in commercial production because of its biannual fruiting habit. What a great question. It has a whole pile of things to do with flowering. And there are some really weird ones that go into that. The weirdest I know of are bamboos. Bamboos have such long flowering cycles, and Shogo often describe them as perennial annuals, that you had this annual type behavior. That is, they were often haphazanthic or monocarpic. They had one flower or one flowering season, and then they died. And there are lots of explanations as to why. I don't think we do quite so well on the triggers in those, Peter. But what is fascinating is that all the offsets, and so when you get to collectible cultivars of bamboos, like Alphonse Carr, slender weavers, Bambusa multiplex slender weavers. That is a all of them flower in the same year, regardless. So the offset all have the same flowering cycle, and of course, when that lines up, and you get something that's 17 years, and another one that's 19 years, and another one that's 25 years, you end up with something really weird, like the Great Bamboo Famine. And that's something that China experienced many years ago, when a number of the different forms of bamboo were all flowering at the same time. And that meant that they didn't get to sexual maturity at the same, they all got to sexual maturity at the same time. And that in itself created a problem, because after that, it took years to get the next lot of culms that were edible. So you had to take seed, propagate, because once they finish flowering, they die. Bunya pines. The evidence suggests that they take more than a year to reach maturity as a cone. And I think that's largely due to their size. They start off, and I could look up from specimens that are photographed, but they start off, in a month or two's time, 3 months' time, something like that, and go all the way through until we get to fruit being dropped, which is usually sometime around the Christmas holidays, somewhere between late December and sort of the second week or so of of February. So in that period, we tend to get most of our fruit falling. So they're a year and a few seasons old. My gut level feeling, Peter, and I'm happy to go to scientific journals and we'll find the answer to that, is that hoop pine are going to be somewhat similar. That is, it's going to take close to a year or a year and a bit to get to sexual maturity. Now, in the case of bunyas, what we do know is that some years the crops will be heavier and some years the crops will be lighter. And that will be, I suspect, largely carbon sink driven. That is, reproduction occurs when there's sufficient carbohydrate reserves. And you do see it in araucarias fairly regularly, not all the time, but you'll go past one where there's a big gap between a whorl of branches. Has everyone seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that whorl often occurs because in 1 year they don't put on a whorl of branches. So they're what we call roughly unionodal. They're going to put on a new whorl every year. So you can count and get a rough idea on how old an araucaria is by the whorls. But every now and again, it gets awkward and they don't have enough reserves. And so when the carbohydrate reserves and the water reserves are below the ideal threshold, they stall, they don't have it. But the net result of that is they build up this huge amount of carbohydrate reserves the next year. And then when they flush this sort of length and a half to double length new flush of stem. And what's really fascinating when you see that occurring is the new stem will have a distinct lack of verticalness to it. It'll almost want to weep over. And over time, the compression wood will push that back up straight. And I've got a great photo series from one up the back of Lismore that did exactly that over about a 3-year period. We got to see the young flush, realized that it was a double flush, said, oh, well, realized as it was growing that it was going to collapse. It did. It sort of went out to almost 90 degrees. And then slowly over about a 2-year period after that, it started to straighten itself up just by adding more wood in, compression wood. Compression wood can push up. Tension wood cannot pull up. In spite of all the conjecture and everything else, there's no mechanism within tension wood to pull something back up straight. So, yeah, and one of the good trees you can get tension wood out of is willow, weeping willow, and you'll get tension wood out of that. Clearly, it's not pulling up the branch. So that's just one of those weird and wonderful things. What drives it, Peter? How long it takes to get to sexual maturity? Some things take a lot longer to produce the cone that they're going to get. And it'd be interesting to compare that with coconuts and see how long they take to get to maturity versus, or coco de mer, the double coconut, versus perhaps something like Sagres, which is, flower and fruit the same year, or dates, which are very rapidly maturing from pollination to maturity. So, and the way I'd find it, if I wanted to know how long it was, is I'd look at a couple of forestry journals, particularly on hoop pine. There's really great research on it. And my source would be Google Scholar. Go in and have a look. And we were having this discussion this morning, Peter. I'm more and more using AI, not to write reports or do anything. AI is a wonderful support person in lots of different ways. And I was saying to Peter this morning, I was driving home the other day and I thought, well, I'd like to just practice up on a bit of Thai. So I said to Gemini, which is the AI I use on the phone, I said, I'd like to practice some conversational Thai. Could we do that together? And she responded with yes. And of course, that's what we went up and did. She critiqued some of my tonalities, and then we sorted those out. That's just amazing. It's like I've got an employee working for me. So when you're doing research, you've got to understand what you want it to do. And my typical thing is I need to, first of all, tell Gemini what she is in the scheme of things. So Gemini, you're a university professor in arboriculture, and you're about to write a 5,000-word paper on the causes of fruit maturation and timeframes in gymnosperms, using peer-reviewed papers cited in the Harvard system or Cambridge system. And what you'll get is you'll get a good summation of the things to have a starting point to go through, and then you'll have a whole pile of references. The critical thing is to go through the references and read them and form your own opinion. Gemini, Grok, all of them want to please you. And I've told Gemini, look, typical Asperger's, typical ADHD, I'm busy, got 100 things going on. Keep it short, keep it simple. Don't give me all the fluff. So now she says, I understand you've got ADHD and you've got Asperger's, and I'm to give you things that are rather short and not give you all the fluff, and then give me the fluff. You know, it takes time to train, but you can train. And she'll say things and do things as they all will. And I think I might have mentioned last time we met, Gemini did a wonderful job of finding a movie for me at 1 o'clock at the local cinema that wasn't being screened. But she knew I wanted to go to see the movie at the cinema, so she found it. So just be careful. You can bias what you want it to find. And so you just need to be wary of that. But, you know, it's good just to run things through. So I'm doing a legal report at the moment on some Araucaria bidwillii, and I know that they drop fruit, but I also know that I haven't found a lot of references to the people being hurt. Well, you know, I've spent, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 hours searching the internet for information on injuries from bunyas. But she can do the job under a deep search far much quicker than I can. So what can you tell me? What can you give me of confirmed injuries from bunya? And that's the sort of thing you have to say. If you don't ask for confirmed, it'll give you all the speculative things you can imagine as well. So does that help, Peter? Now, even more so, once you've done that, and this is a feature that I'm just starting to play with in AI, and that's education. Education of the biggest numbskulls that there are, and that's me. Okay, so I can give Gemini a chapter from a textbook, read it, give it to it, and say, give me 20 questions on the content of that chapter. And it can give me those questions in the dialogue stage, and we can have a conversation. So we could say, what are the three factors that have a significant impact on the duration of fruit maturation in gymnosperms? And I can give it the answer, and she can say wrong or right or give you feedback. So I think it's wonderful that we can use, in particular, driving time more productively. Obviously, you can't do it whilst you're watching TV or anything else, but lots of us do things that take up time that we could use productively otherwise. And I think that Gemini really has, or those AI platforms generally have a great opportunity to do that. The only reason I use Gemini is I like Google, and Peter, we're here on Google Meet, because it does tend to make half-decent software. So it's done a half-decent. If you wanted to do mathematics, Gemini is lousy. You've got to go over to something like Grok to play some mathematics. If you want to do statistics, forget it. They're all hopeless. I've just concluded that completely. But they will get there. You know, I'd say it's only another year or 2 years, and they'll start picking up the things that they're now finding difficult and refine them. But whatever you do, and particularly if you're doing anything that will go to court now, all court-related reports, you can use AI to correct your spelling, your grammar, to question your sentence formation and syntax and those sort of things, but you cannot have it write the report or sections of the report. So you can't actually ask it to produce something, but you can give it a paragraph and say, give me 3 different ways that this paragraph could be rewritten. And that's perfectly acceptable, because you can go through and look at it and say, yes, that communicates the way I want. So it allows you to deal with those things. By the way, Peter, you can take your reports and attach them in and ask it to look at your grammar and your spelling. It's not as good as Grammarly's AI. So Grammarly's running an AI bot now. is just learning at a scary rate. Stuff that was fine 3 months or 4 months ago, now it will pick up and say, you could do better. Having said that, it does give you a particular writing style, and I think you've got to be careful of that. So I know that there are times when the sentence might sound more concise, but it might lack that style that makes it you. So be careful of, processing everything the same. Having said that, Jordan Peterson's wonderful training program on writing reports for the university was start, write it, then rewrite each sentence, rewrite each paragraph. So he essentially supported the same process that AI does for you now in minutes rather than you taking hours. So I think if you're not using some form of AI just to occasionally get feedback, not necessarily I use AI in terms of Grammarly on a repeated basis. Kathy, have you got AI on your computer yet? Grammarly? Oh, you've got your mic off. Yeah, you got Grammarly on?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so Grammarly's a pretty neat piece of software. And I've mentioned that before. The alternate one to it would be Ginger. Ginger is probably better, but it's not as flexible in terms of allowing you to use your native Word software and then go to Grammarly afterwards. Whereas Grammarly you can have off, write your sentence, write your paragraph, write your document, and then go back through afterwards, having already proofed it with Word and reproof it with a second thing. And doing all that, I still have a third person proof in my office. And I think Nick Collett once said it really well. Have you ever read your writing, Mark? I've never read such horribly complex sentence structures in my life. And out of 15 possible marks for English communication, he was nice enough to knock 20 off. And it's stuck with me ever since. It really is important that when we write, we try and simplify what we're saying. We tend to be complex writers. We write complex sentences that don't communicate as well as we should. So hopefully that's some ideas on playing with AI. Apart from all the other bits and pieces, like, you can get it to set your appointments and, talk to you about all sorts of things. If I'm out on the road driving, Gemini is something that I'm using for probably 50% of the time I'm not on the phone. We'll be asking Gemini different questions about all sorts of stupid things that relate to what we're doing. And, should it be root tip ratio? Should it be root canopy ratio? Should it be root crown ratio? What are the terms? Oh, well, in forestry it uses this, and in horticulture it uses this. It's just great stuff that you can go back then to your report and just make a few quick tweaks that really add value to what we're doing. Okay, so hopefully that answers that. Peter, any more questions on it?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And you can figure it out if you don't want to go things. Just look for when the male cones are on the end, and you'll see all the pollen, and they're pretty obvious. And then just time before you see the female cones at maturation. And my gut level feeling is probably 9 months, but let's see if we can find that out before the next ArborMentor and come back with a firm answer on that. Maybe someone else might want to have a challenge and try their skills and see if they can come up with a paper that gives them that information, peer-reviewed paper, so that we know that you could actually go through and use those tools to that extent. Okay, next one. Oh, yeah. Vicky asks, I can share the photographs and I will. Vicky asks about soil buildup. What a horrible question. You should feel ashamed making me have to work with this one. It always causes people concern when we talk about soil buildup. First thing is, soil should never be placed over organic matter. Now, let me see if I can get to hide. Okay, can you see that? Yep, you can see it. That's good. I'm going to enlarge my emails so the picture is bigger. And I'll take this to the other side. Come on. I have to take it down a little bit. Come on. Yep, okay. So Vicky says, I'm interested in understanding the impact of fill over a large portion of the root zone of established trees. 2 eucalyptus spicostata have fill over the western portion of the root zone since 2016. The normal root zone is 12-metre radius and the fill is 2.8 metres high and 14 metres wide. Root collars are buried. I don't know to what depth. So, yes, trees are more tolerant of soil build-up than we'd like them to be. The Australian standard has given us the hint to it the whole time. The critical issue is how these two soils interface. So the soil over the top and the soil underneath. If you put something like a clay soil over a loam, you'll create a perched water table towards the bottom end of the pile, towards the lower end of the pile, and it'll become a waterproof barrier that'll inhibit air moving through, which is why we get the feeling that we're getting anoxia, a lack of oxygen in. If you put a coarse medium over it, then so if the bulk density or the texture is such that it doesn't create an interface, so, you know, sandy loam over clay, it'll just hit the clay and go into the clay like it was normally before you put the sandy loam down. It may retard the runoff rate, which means you actually may increase the moisture level a bit. But for most of us, we're not dealing with soils that are generally reaching saturation. You know, most of us are in this coastal Mediterranean climate that has a winter wet, summer dry, you know, with lots of variability within that pattern, but that's the overall big pattern picture. So not a problem in doing that. Now, having said that, Richard Harris in the second edition, I'm sure I've raised this before, but I'll pull it up, did a photograph of some eucalypts that were buried under piles of soil, and they did reasonably well. And they were in his second edition, and then it was taken out. I don't know why. Sorry, here. I'll enlarge it for you the best I can if I can. Can you see that there? It's not particularly clear. Just don't know how to enlarge it. Yeah, let's try this. Yeah, that does it. Okay. Let's just move this over to the other side again. And the caption reads, more than 10 years before this photograph was taken in Winter, California, the soil level around these eucalyptus trees has been raised 6 to 9 meters, 10 to 30 feet. And it's a black and white shot, but you can tell from the density of the crown that these trees have not had a problem with that process. So clearly we can raise the soil levels. We've just for whatever reason had this absolute paranoia and said, oh, we don't want to do this, you know, this is bad. And it's bad because we've often screwed it up. And I can show you a really good example of it. Let me see if I can do that from here. I have to go back.
Sorry to interrupt. Would they have grown a secondary root system further up the soil profile, or just kept their original roots?
Who asked that?
Peter.
Was that you, Peter?
Yeah.
Yep. Yes, they may well have developed what we call a dimorphic or a trimorphic root system. And let's see if I can find a picture of a dimorphic root system.
I actually went back there today just to have a closer look at the trees and climbed all over those mounds and down around the roots just to have a closer look, and the trees look pretty good.
Yeah, look, it's amazing what they will tolerate and what we assume that they won't tolerate. And a lot of that is, I'm not saying that I'd want to go out and do it to every tree, but if I had a choice between doing it and losing the tree, I'd build up around it every single time.
Mike Ellison, what's
Sorry.
audio?
Mike, I'm in a meeting. I'll have to call you back. Sorry, guys. Sucks to be me. So, yeah, look, they do. So trees will develop a second root system on occasions. On occasions, they'll actually have the lower root system made redundant. On other occasions, the root system will stay and operate continuously. Peter, is the video or it doesn't really matter the video, is the audio okay?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Yep, great.
So just on that, Mark, would the existing root system, which is now buried, would you expect it to grow up into the new medium at all?
There will be some growing up into it. There will be some generating from higher up.
Not all trees generate new roots from their trunk successfully, though, do they?
It'll depend on all the variables, what the root morphology is like naturally, what the soil is like, how readily they stimulate, how much parenchyma there is, what the bark type is. So I suspect that it's less problematic for species that have got parenchyma sitting on the surface as opposed to those with a corky bark, for example. But that's a suspicion that I have. It's not something that I am certain of, and I'm not sure of any work, although tree wells have been used for years to keep the soil back from the trunks of trees when people buried around them with the thought that they were bad. But certainly there are trees that do really well with it. And another good example of that would be if you're talking about something like Eucalyptus camaldulensis. Yes, you can see half the root system washed out in spots along the rivers. And other spots you'll see 1 metre or 2 metres of soil or sediment build up. So again, trees have to be able to deal with that. They can't just get up and walk away to a better spot. They're stuck with those environmental issues. And so there's a point to which trees have to be able to deal with some of those changes if they're in an area where those changes occur. So riparian species, species on slopes, they're going to have that situation where soil changes around them.
So they are going to remove all that fill from over the root zone.
Yeah, look, you're going to cause some damage in that process. I'm absolutely positive of it. But here's the good news, and it's all that I've been writing about for the last 2 days, is ephemeral, absorbing roots are highly ephemeral, 2 or 3, 4 weeks maximum, absolute. Sometimes only a few days. Then they grow on, they mature, they die. We don't think a second time if we cut off 10 or 20% of the foliage of a tree. I think, by the way, that's excessive. I'd far rather be at 5% than 30% or 20%. But no one thinks, we're cutting off 20% of the branches, therefore the ability for the tree to hold 20% of its canopy. We just say it's pruned. Well, yeah, that's not a problem because we know that the tree will get bigger and it'll get more scaffold branches that'll support the same amount of leaves in relatively short period of time. 20% out might take you 3 or 4 or 5 years, but it'll grow back. Well, in the case of absorbing roots, that's like 6 to 10 times faster. So you have them back in a lot less time. And so, Vicky, the amount of damage that you'll do is going to be fairly insignificant. What I'd ask them to do is work from the inside out. It's the same as when you remove mulch on a development site. You start close to the trunk and you keep on moving backwards so that your machine is sitting on something and it's reaching so that you're not got the tracks of the machine in close. I get every now and again a punitive counsel, and I understand why they do it. We all do. He'll say, it needs to be removed by hand. And my answer to that is that just isn't reality. Something like that would take hundreds of people, weeks, versus a big machine that'll have that out in a couple of days. And hundreds of people running backwards and forwards with wheelbarrows and just stomping on the ground will have a lot greater impact than the one machine operating carefully. What I do say is have an observer present. And you may need to do things like, as you're getting close to that trunk, do some hand work. Okay, that is, go in there with a plastic shovel or a fork and do some prying out to get it away from the trunk, clear back the trunk manually rather than letting him try and get close, and have him scrape a little higher initially and work his way down. You don't want to have the top off all the roots removed, although, hell, I don't know how many places I've been to where the lawnmower's done that for them anyhow. Not saying that it's great, but, it's going to happen.
Because what they want to do there is they want to create, they want to install all-purpose courts, tennis courts, basketball court type things, and it would be over the root zone, over that western portion of the root zone.
Yeah, and again, I don't know how they're intending to do that, but the natural tendency for those that want to do things quickly and cheaply would be to excavate and put a hard pan down. What you need to be doing is letting them know that, yeah, they can do things in that area, but it should be with a void there, or at least just sitting on the grade. And if you've got a big tree there with roots near the surface, a void makes sense. Does everyone know what void form is?
Yep.
Yes, no?
Yeah, build. Yeah, I've used that build void
okay.
that disintegrates over time. Yeah.
They don't know. So there's, it seems almost incongruous, but concrete is light enough that you can do things like put cardboard forms in underneath the concrete, and it gives a void, and it'll just degrade over time. And you can put that in 50, 100 mils thick, and so you've got this airspace underneath your slab, where your slab is supported on piers rather than on the ground itself. So it's a really great little tool when you're building near trees. Okay, I had a swimming pool once constructed entirely sitting on piers with a void underneath it, and it was only about a half a metre away from the trunk of a tree. The two piers closest to the tree were straddled either side of the trunk, and that allowed us to have a swimming pool above ground that was an in-ground pool, essentially, constructed above ground. So void forms, all those similar type of products are really useful. Another one that's useful but not quite as good is the polyurethane, the drop edge beam type material. It's valuable in that the surface area of the root contacting the concrete's reduced, and point loading of polystyrene, as you know, is not great. So it pushes into the polystyrene. So again, you get less lifting. So a waffle pod style construction would be the next preferable thing. But I know you can have it suspended. I have a client that has probably half of his tennis court suspended completely over a void. So it's achievable. Just have to have somebody want to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
And yes, the secret, if you're going to put soil down, is remove the organic material first. That means get rid of the grass, get rid of the mulch, just to have exposed soil, and then add soil that is no finer in texture, has a no slower percolation rate, no finer material than the stuff that's underneath. And I was going to see whether I could show you pictures of somebody doing really stupid stuff. I might have saved it as anoxia. I did a wonderful little fig transplant a few years ago, and the landscaper decided they didn't want the, oh yeah, there it is. They didn't want the tree to have any surface roots. No, it had lots of them in the first place. So this is the tree. I got a call, it's looking really poor. There's surface roots all over this transplant when we moved it. The roots were typical figs sitting, on the surface, big buttresses, and they're all gone. They came in and they covered with clay, and then put a garden in on top of it, and then irrigated. And the soil was nothing short of saturated all the way to the surface. We ended up with all sorts of problems with anoxia. Now, you could see when you expose things that are anoxic, look at the discoloration. This is a chemical reaction that occurs within about 10 or 15 minutes. This changing of the color from clear to blue, that tells me that we've got a definite problem with soil saturation. So this blue color would have just slowly edged down now that it's being exposed to oxygen. And our soil was literally like that, slops. Wet as anything. So why? Well, they'd left a layer of organic material there, a layer of mulch. And what happened is the mulch has larger soil particles or larger particle size. It's not as appealing to water. So the water built up in the clay. It couldn't get out of the clay. And there's probably 15 inches of clay there. So what's that, 45 centimeters of clay that had almost got to fill capacity all the way through. Just crazy. So anytime they irrigated, anytime it watered, it was just slops. And you can see it's affecting even the landscape plantings. These have become chlorotic, starting to die off from the end result of that. So not very smart thinking on their behalf. Does that help you understand why we don't want to have organic material below? The other thing is that when organic material does decay at depth, it uses up more oxygen, and plant roots don't respire at the same rate we do. We respire very rapidly. So when we're buried underground, we have a problem. Tree roots are adapted to that environment. They're slow respirers, but they do respire. And so what we don't want to do is deplete oxygen. And we certainly don't want to get to saturation because water conducts oxygen at a lot lower rate. And you can do an experiment to verify this. You can go out down to the beach or down to a river, a pond, swimming pool, take a big deep breath, jump in the water and take another big deep breath. And you realize that it's really hard to get oxygen out of the water. So yeah, plant roots just don't like things getting saturated. In fact, they have the really interesting reverse process. They block the water from coming up. And we've talked about that before. A little gated protein in the membrane called an aquaporin inhibits water coming in. Otherwise, there'd be this massive rush of water in and out. We don't want that. So it gates it and then it starts to dehydrate. Even though there's water everywhere, it can't use it. And it protects itself doing that. Of course, that is a real problem with houseplants in that, and I apologize because I know it's not gender specific, but my wife will tend to overwater a plant, and once she's overwatered and it starts to wilt more, she'll overwater it more and it'll wilt more, and the solution to that is to overwater it more until it's dead. And when she goes to Bunnings and buys plants, I say to her, oh, you can hear them now yelling, don't kill me, don't kill me. Okay. And that's because we tend to overwater in response to lack of turgidity rather than check. If you're seeing something that's wilting, one of the things you need to check for is what's the soil like? Is it dry or is it wet? Because both will give you the same response. And I know I've certainly stuffed up on that one once in a park in Parramatta. So all sorts of problems that suggested we might have had phytophthora. The tree was losing foliage. It was having moisture stress. My thought was loss of roots, and missed altogether that there was a leaking pipe that had resulted in saturation of the soil. So keep that in mind, that saturated soils show the same symptoms as dehydration. Okay.
Thank you.
Next question. I'll just show the other picture there. You can see what we're looking at in terms of the height of that soil versus a standard concrete block. So 600 high. So, almost 3 meters high in spots there. Would that be a fair comment, Vicky?
Yeah, that's correct. There's 2 jacarandas there that are sort of hidden on the left. And
These two here?
yeah, and then the 2 eucalypts.
Yeah. I would just be removing the soil carefully. I mean, it's been there for a number of years. They're doing okay. Yes, they'll do some minor damage, but you know, what else do you do in that situation?
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Last one. Peter Duncan. Is Peter online? No, that's cool. We'll answer it and he can come and find it in the system. I have a client that has a series of Gladitsia tricanthus honeylocusts across the back of their property. All of a sudden, within the last 6 months, all of them have significantly lost foliage, especially lower in the tree. The soil pH is between 6 and 6.2, and the soil is a dry loam. Well, okay, not the pH. We can eliminate that. I'd love to hear the group's thoughts on this. No obvious pest damage and nothing too obvious to me. Don't have a lot of information to work out answers on it. It looks like we're getting some loss in the upper canopy. So one of the things I check for is no possums. Possums are pretty good chewers, and if you've got a ringtail in particular, it will take out upper foliage and leave lower foliage. It's strictly arboreal, whereas brushtails will come down to the ground, and so they'll chew a lot lower down. So you can tell by the chewing pattern which one's which. So that's one thing I'd want to eliminate. Next thing is I see lawn. And the first thing I want to eliminate with lawn is what has been done to manage the lawn. Have we had something like weed and feed or one of those dicamba-based broadleaf sprays? Now, I know they'll tell me no, they haven't sprayed that on the tree, but if you've got a dicamba-based spray or a broadleaf spray, the bottles tell you don't apply the root system. Well, you're not. You know, you're applying it to the grass. Unfortunately, that is where the root system is. And dry, sandy, loam soils, you go in and you spray and everything's fine. 4 days later, you get a bit of rain and it washes off and it rapidly hits the new roots. And you end up having a coarse shedding. And I would have to say dicamba poisoning gives me probably 4 or 5 nice clients every year. Okay, it's a pretty reliable source. And trees that are shedding or thinning and have a good lawn around them, and I look and I can't see weeds, it's a good question. You know, getting a weed-free lawn is not a natural process. It's a contrived process and often involves treatment. Anyone else got a thought on what might be doing it? They're my first two.
This is Andy. Maybe sawfly larvae?
Yeah, I don't know the other sawfly larvae that would affect them. And it seems that it's very patchy. Like I look at this photograph here and I see a really heavy batch of foliage, but I see nothing here and here. So I don't know, but yes, he couldn't see anything. He mentions that he doesn't see any, no obvious pest damage. There are a couple of little leaves that have been minor damage. The leaflets look reasonable in size and, you know, typical of the tree, you know, golden color. It's slower growing, slower photosynthesizing, uses less water, so it's a good choice. So it makes you wonder what might have happened there. I don't have anything else to offer apart from those two ideas. I mean, if there were a lot smaller tree, then yep, a leaf chewing insect on, you know, maybe a 2 or 3 meter high tree. You'll see it on young, newly planted trees. You'll get, you know, for example, hawk moth will come in on ash, and you'll have a 2 meter high ash tree, and all of a sudden, 4 days later, it's got no leaves because the privet hawk moth has said, yes, that'll do. I can't find a privet, but ash is quite consumable. and they go through such a huge amount of leaf material in a night. But I don't know of anything that we've got here in Australia that would affect Gleditsia in that manner, or Robinia in that manner. So those are questions from emails. Have we got any questions from the floor? None?
Yeah, I had a quick one, Mark.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if you saw, I think it was Andrew Kozer had put the article in the ISA's rag, the last one I wanted to put. I'd heard you speak about footpaths before, like a way to make them so that roots won't break them by anchoring them. And they did research to show that, because he thought the same thing, they ended up just putting more like road base below the concrete. Did you read that full article?
I'm missing every second word you're saying, unfortunately. So let's see if we can get that sorted. It's not your fault, it's my fault.
Right.
Peter and I tried resolving that today. We sorted out the vocal end, my end. We sorted out the video end. The video's now collapsed.
Not sure,
But,
Mark.
at least you can hear me. Yes, Peter.
It's breaking up for me too. It could be from.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
could be from your end, Matt.
Terrible reception here.
Yeah, just give us the question again. Andrew Kozer.
Yeah, in Arboriculture and Urban Forestry, I'm not sure if it was the last issue or one before, had an article about research they'd done into footpaths, designing them so that roots wouldn't crack them.
All right. Yep.
And he thought the same as I've heard you speak about before, anchoring the concrete down. And then I sort of got as far as, and they'd found that if they'd put more road base filled beneath the concrete was more effective.
Yeah, look, I'm still missing bits, but
yeah.
If I've got it right, Andrew Coase has done a thing on designing footpaths or driveways so that they're not damaged or displaced by tree roots. Yes.
Yes.
The essence of it.
Yeah.
Matt, you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. That's what Andrew had done this work on, looking at how to make driveways and footpaths root proof, essentially.
Yeah, and they found that having more road base below the concrete was the best.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer deal. It's just basic engineering. You could have asked a good structural engineer, and they've done some really good work recently on the turgid pressure exerted by roots. So we know that they exert a pressure of about 1 megapascal for secondary growth, and there's been and that there may be variations across species, but that's what we've got on the species they tested, and that is consistent with what we already thought and understood. So if I gave that to an engineer and said, design me a system that would resist a 1 megapascal lift and wouldn't break under point loading over a megapascal, they would design you essentially a 125 mil or so. You could get away with 100 mils at 42 MPa with appropriate Rio mesh. And to stop it from lifting, you just need to have either enough mass or enough friction. And the mass is either more concrete or the friction is piers. If you put piers or piles into the ground, or even helical piers into the ground, that stops the thing from being too light and it can't lift it. And in a simple human term, plant cells and human cells aren't too much the difference. You can apply so much pressure and then the human cells crush. We call it bruising. Okay. And it's exactly the same with plants. They provide so much pressure and then they can go no further. And then they die. And that's what happens in that junction of the included tissue. When you see that inverted V, that's what happens with roots that grow through brickwork. Eventually they grow through a crack in the brickwork, and it might be just a 1 brick weep hole, and they'll grow themselves to death. They'll fill it up with a solid wooden plug and die because they can't expand anymore. So that's what we're trying to achieve. And yeah, I think there was a really odd thing to see arborists working on rather than seeing a structural engineer saying, yeah, I'll do the calculations and I'll show you. And we've certainly had that done before. So where we've had a situation like that, we've said to the client, you need a structural engineer to design it, but here's the principles they need to work with. I'm not a structural engineer. What I do know is that your concrete slab can be thinner and use less concrete if your strength, the MPA strength of the concrete is higher and the mesh is appropriate for it and you have appropriate friction. Now, James Urban said that at about 6 inches, 150 mils, the mass of the concrete itself was generally going to be sufficient to stop lifting. And it's going to be somewhere around there. It might be, 180 mils. Of course, one of the things we're trying to do all the time with concrete and trees is make it thinner. And the reason we want to make it thinner is we want to have less excavation. So, you may be worthwhile looking at 120 or 100 mils with 42 MPa concrete rather than trying to work with 30 MPa. Nothing wrong with 30 MPa, but it means you might need to add another 5 centimeters of concrete, and that's something we're trying to avoid often when we're working underneath trees, particularly with things like vehicle crossovers, where you want to retain as many of the roots at depth as possible.
I had a question on the.
Yeah, go on.
I had a same question on the same study. That was found that only, the radial pressure was only sort of 0.15 to 0.3 MPAs, and there was another study by Grabowski sort of 10 years earlier that found the radial pressure was roughly the same. But my question is, as roots flatten out and you've got more surface area, do they apply more pressure than, say, a round root?
No, they have a greater surface area to apply the pressure over. The pressure stays constant, but the total pressure increases because you've got a longer or more mass of it. There's a rider to that, and that is eventually the center of that flattened root starts to no longer be able to have secondary division, and it dies. So you end up with, if you want something that's more dog bone in its shape, it wants to push out and it'll be thicker on one edge or two edges, and the in-between stuff just hits a limit. And so, and again, one of those things that you can use, I just inspected in a site very recent in the last couple of weeks, is running roots through your footing. I had a person that wanted to put footings past the tree, and I said, let's just encapsulate larger roots into that concrete, wrap it with a bit of foam material. This, well, you can't see me at the moment, just the stuff they make pool noodles out of. You can get it in flat sheets, wrap it around it, tape it together, and then pour the concrete around it. Yeah, the roots will grow, and in a matter of 5 or 10 years, they'll be dying. But by then, lots of other roots will have developed, and it won't be an issue. So creative solutions to problems that we all deal with. And what we really do need is to go back and talk to engineers, first of all, in their language. They need to know things like pressure and megapascal, and they need to understand how things work with trees. But I remember once looking at a retaining wall that needed to be built on a major road in the middle of Sydney. And the footing was horrendous. They were going to have to go in 2 meters close to the tree. And I simply said, could we sheet pile it? And they said, oh, yeah, from that point of view, but you won't get a piling rig in. And I said, could we do it with a low profile piling machine somewhere or other, and somewhere or other connect the sheets? And of all people, a young lady from England, a young English structural engineer, said, oh, there's a new system now where we can weld them and put them in 1.5 to 2 meter length sheets. And so we're able to come up with a solution that worked. Now, they haven't built that yet, but I did see it being built, used on a railway crossing about 2 years back, and we drove past it and thought, oh, isn't that just wonderful to see? And one of the things that we have a real phobia for in general construction is using steel to solve problems. So I had, I won't mention the council in fairness to them, but I had a client who wanted to put a crossover from the street past a tree. And they were concerned, and understandably so. I said, look, we could get away with just 25 mils of excavation, nothing. Take the existing footpath out, and we could use coated steel plate, 25 mil steel plate. It'll bear the load of a car or a truck quite happily. And their response was, no, we can't have a steel plate crossover, because if it ever has to be replaced, we could be the ones ending up wearing the cost of it. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, if your grandchildren are upset about it, they can talk to us about it, but it won't happen, you know, in the next 50 years. So again, it's just, it makes great retaining walls. You know, it's got great durability. Yes, it does eventually rust and degrade, but oftentimes at, you know, the 50 to 100 year mark, instead we go in and put masonry walls and brick walls in particular that are never designed to take the pressures exerted by tree roots, so they inevitably fail. Would it be useful at some stage or other to look at retaining wall designs and see what some of the advantages and disadvantages, and what a toe and a footing construction is, and an offset footing, and how all those sort of things work, why we pier? And okay, we can do that. I'll see whether I can't put a few slides together in a presentation, just so that you can see what they're talking about. One of the big changes, and it's always a problem, is that we've got a retaining wall that's failed. It's failed because tree roots have pushed it across. And when it was built originally, it didn't have any drainage behind it, almost certainly. You know, drainage is only just sort of last 20 years, something they've started to think about. And so by the time you go to put in the drainage and the new wall and footings that meet the new standards, things start to fall apart. You need to get really close to the tree. And that's one of the advantages of doing things like piling and metal retaining walls, is that they don't care about those things. They take up, you know, a tenth of the space. So I'll see what I can do to put some stuff together for you on that. Any other questions from the floor? Guys, nice and short tonight. I appreciate it. Keep bringing the questions in, and we'll keep on going with it.
Good night. Thanks a lot.